everybody. Glad to be here. And in the next 30 minutes or so, I will tell you a story that started actually out of frustration. Frustration because it turned out to be so hard to create a good tutorial. A tutorial where everything and every reference and every stuff was kept consistent and what really allowed my students to keep their eyes on the ball about what was being taught. But it's also a story about how XML markup and XProc came to the rescue, and spoiler alert, it has a happy end. So, anyway, there have already been some talks about artificial intelligence here, and I tried it also to create some illustrations for my talk. And what you see here is the result of the question, give me a cartoon of a teacher teaching XML. And as you can see, the AI really understood the concept because there's not a single angle bracket on the blackboard, and the guy's t-shirt is also a bit off. So maybe better next year. Okay. My name is Erik Siegel. I'm a content engineer, XML specialist from the Netherlands. I do all kinds of XML stuff. I'm also the author of a couple of XML books, related books, of which one with Adam Retter. But what I also do, I provide trainings for some of my customers on request. And stubborn as I am, I like to create these trainings and these tutorials myself, because then I can really concentrate on what I think is being important. And that turned out to be hard. And maybe you wonder, what's so hard about creating a tutorial? Yeah, it may be a lot of work, but what's so hard about it? So let me take you on the day of a life of a tutorial developer. So what I do is I create a presentation first with a lot of sheets. You don't have to read it, it's not important. But on these slides are things like, okay, please now do exercise this. And as we did in that exercise, well, there are references there. For the students, I prepare a set of files. Let's assume this is an XSLT course. So you have an instruction. I do it in PDF, could also be text. There's an input file because you're doing XSLT. There's a template file, which is usually just an empty root element, but could also contain boilerplate text or an XSLT program with a mistake that they're supposed to fix or whatever. And I also provide a solution and sometimes an explanation if the solution is complex. Also here you have things. For instance, the input XML is repeated in the instruction because I say, here's your input, please change this element into that. And the same for when I have a solution XML, I sometimes repeat it in the explanation because that makes it easier for me to explain the thing. But then, also sometimes on the instructions are other references to other things in the tutorial. And I sometimes duplicate code from the set of files into my presentation because I want to have easy access to it while I'll present my course. And what I also like to do, and I'll tell you more about it later, I like to add some support, in this case an Oxygen project file, in which all the transformation scenarios are pre-cooked, so the student only has to press Ctrl-Shift-T and the transformation magically happens for them. That's nice. Okay, so far so good. But then I think, oh, this is not good enough, let's change something. So I change the solution XML, and then I have to remember that I duplicated this code in my presentation and in my explanation PDF. Okay, that's kind of easy, but then I insert an exercise. And then you can see that really the shit hits the fan, because you have to renumber everything, everywhere, every reference in your project file, in your presentation, it's horrible. And after a while, and after doing that for several times, I start to feel a little bit like this guy here. It actually psychologically stops me from bettering my course, and that's a bad thing. So how can we amend this? Well, of course, we have XML, right? I'm an XML guy, so can we take XML to the rescue? Okay, let's have a little bit closer look at the requirements. We have a teacher and we have students. For the teacher, I want to have a presentation. I like to use PowerPoint. There's nothing special about it, I'm just used to it. And I like to use the animation feature of PowerPoint, which you probably already have noticed. From there, I have, for the students, I have exercises. Exercises has, an exercise consists of a set of files, as an Oxygen project for that, and everything gets zipped up into a zip file so I can easily transfer this whole bunch to the students. There are lots of cross-references there and code applications. And the problem is, of course, how to keep these things consistent with each other. And also, how can I more easily write an instruction or an explanation? Because that's something you do quite often when you create these kinds of tutorials. One more thing here is an example of a sheet in a tutorial. And there are things here that I would like to keep consistent. For instance, there's a number of the exercise you need to do. There's the name of an input file, which can change based on certain parameters or certain choices made. And there's a piece of code there which comes from one of the files that the students already have. And that should also be kept consistent. Here's an example of an Oxygen file which is configured so it gives very easy access to all the exercises. Students can easily find things because they're in the project, and all the XSLT files are coupled to a transformation scenario, so you can just hit transform and it all works, which is pretty good. Okay, how can we turn back to XML? How can we put XML here to the rescue? Well, I started thinking about this, and the first thing, of course, is what you do. You think, I need a kind of markup language. I need some kind of course description markup language, or if you wish, a document-specific, a domain-specific language, a DSL, for this. This stuff references all kinds of input files you need for your tutorial. You still have to create them. And then you need some kind of huffing and puffing machine that turns this all into, for the students, a zip file, and for the teacher, it should create a presentation with all the references correct and all the code duplicated in the way it should be. And if you look at this, it might be a familiar pattern. It looks like a little bit like this. And instead of we run the results on our CPU, we run it on the wetware of the students and the teacher. Anyway, let's have a quick look at this course description markup I came up with. Here it is. Yeah. Okay, there's a prologue, which is boring. That's why I omitted it. Authors, titles, stuff like that. Settings, lots of settings. And then there is a section about a certain subject, and a section has exercises in it. And here's one of the interesting things. In this exercise, I describe what files belong to the exercise, where it can find them, and then it copies them to the result structure and gives them certain consistent names. They have an ID, which is important. Because here I have an instruction, this is Markdown. I accept code in instructions written in Markdown or in DocBook 5, or even both, mixed can also happen. And there are references in here. For instance, here is a reference between @signs, which will be changed into the name of the actual file that the students see. Here is a reference that is changed into a code block with the contents of the file with that identifier. And there's nothing magic about the @signs or the triple block things. That's just a choice I made. It could have been anything else. And below here you see some instructions from which I can create an Oxygen project file, which says, okay, if this file is up, please use this transformation scenario to transform it, and the students can just sit back and be happy. How should so now we have to write an engine. We have our course description language, we have the idea of what it should look like. How does an engine look like? Well, if you like a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Yesterday we had the hammer which was called XSLT. It's also my hammer, but another hammer of mine is called XProc, XProc 3. And XProc 3 actually turned out to be very well suited for these kinds of problems. For those that don't know it, XProc 3 is a pipelining language. You throw in a document or multiple documents. You put it through all kinds of steps and out comes a result or multiple results if you want to. The good thing is about XProc is that it has all kinds of standard steps. You can do a transformation, you can validate, you can do X-include. It's all pretty easy to do. You can also do XSLFO processing. It handles XML beautifully. XML is its main language, but it can, at least the 3.0 version, can also handle other kinds of files, JSON, HTML, but also binary files, for which zip files are at this moment the most interesting. It can also do, very importantly, housekeeping. Things like creating directories, cleaning directories, deleting files, copying files, stuff like that. All these things where you, when you're doing XML processing only, usually had to go to AND or to an encompassing batch script or shell script or something. It's very easy to reuse steps, and I will show you how that works in a few slides. And it all runs on Akim Berntsen's very good Morgana processor. Let's take a quick look at how you reuse steps in XProc, because that's a feature that actually makes this whole thing very possible. If you have a step, this is an example of some step that merges something. I have no idea what it does, it's just an example. And you want to reuse this in a bigger pipeline. That's very easy to do, and it's a bit of an overlooked feature of XProc. So just a quick aside of how that looks in code. Here we have just a root element of an XProc step, do something, and we want to reuse this do something into a bigger context. What you need to do for this is you need to declare a namespace, any namespace, as long as it's not the XProc namespace. And then you give this step a type in that namespace. And then you write your encompassing step in which you use this one. And the first thing you do is import the do something. And then you can simply use it, this step, by using the type as an XML element name. So it's really very, very easy, if you've written a step before that does something useful, to reuse it in a bigger step. With that in mind, I started to look around on my disk what I already had written or what I could find on the internet. And there were quite some things that were useful. I had Markdown to DocBook, already written, simple Markdown, but good enough. I had DocBook to PDF, which I use for producing my books. Working with zip files, especially Microsoft Office, we'll get back to that. And zip result directory, those kinds of things. So with this in mind, it started actually looking like this, like meshing up Lego bricks. I mean, you have everything and you just have to put it in another configuration together. And most of these Lego bricks I used, I think actually all of them are open sourced by me, and they were already on the internet, and here are the links, and these are also in the article. So with all these Lego bricks, let's put all these Lego bricks together and find out how this course description can be processed by XProc. So we start with our course description in the markup language I showed to you. The first thing I do is X-include. X-include is just a step in XProc, but it makes it so easy to design your input language with an include structure already there. I mean, you hardly have to do anything for it to make include files possible, which is a good thing, because sometimes it's easier to make your big file into smaller segments by including stuff. Then I validated also standard steps, hardly any code to write for it. I validated with a schema and with a schematron, but you could do either or both. Then I compute values. I enhance the XML structure with all kinds of values in a small sequence of XSLTs, add numbers, add paths, stuff like that. I'll get back to that. which is actually a very important thing to do because it makes it easier for the rest of the XProc pipeline to handle the stuff. Then I process the text, I do the markdown to docbook conversions, I check for all these @ signs and triple block angle stuff to convert it and to put all the dereferences, all the references. Then I write all the files, so I copy all the files for the exercises. I create some specials. One of them is and there are more, but one of them is the Oxygen project. I process the presentation. I'll get back to that, how that works, the PowerPoint, and zip the whole thing up, and we're done. So this is a, of course, simplified version of the XProc pipeline. Let's have a look at 3 of the green blocks here. One thing I found out is really important in doing these kinds of things is enhancing your XML with interesting data before you actually do the processing. And what I mean with this is, for instance, I compute the section numbers, I compute the exercise numbers, which are partly parameter driven, but it's also a matter of when you insert something, then the number changes, stuff like that. So you compute them up front, so when something references something else, you can quickly find the number for it. And you also often use this number in directory names and file names and stuff. Another important thing is that I change all the path references, all the URIs, into absolute URIs based on probably other parameters or where the source file is and stuff like that. As soon as you have absolute URIs, you can quickly call an XProc step, for instance, to copy a file, because you have both 2 absolute URIs. You can just copy this one to that one, done. You don't have to worry about where it is and what relative paths actually mean, but you have to compute that all up front. Another one of the green blocks is the Oxygen project generation. What I did, I just took Oxygen, created a few projects and look inside, and hey, it's XML, that's great. And with a bit of trial and error, you can transform your source into an Oxygen project that actually works. There is, of course, a downside to this. It's a proprietary format, and as far as I know, and I've just talked to the Oxygen guys, and they confirmed that it's not written down. There's not even a schema for it. But luckily, they are not going to change it anyway. So that's good. Then the PowerPoint changes. Here's an example of a sheet, how a sheet could look like in the base presentation. You recognize the references with the @ signs and the triple angle brackets, the triple block brackets. And what I want to do is to change this into this. Well, how do you do that? Well, maybe you know, maybe you don't, but a PowerPoint file, actually any Office file, is actually a zip file with a lot of very, very, very complicated XML inside, which is not also complicated, but it's also interrelated. So they point to each other, and you usually need to access multiple files to get something done. Which is, because it's so complicated and some numbers are so obscure what they actually mean, it's almost impossible to generate. I toyed a little bit with, can I create a markup language for this? But the answer was very quickly no. It's too complicated. However, when you have an existing PowerPoint file, it's relatively easy to change it because it's XML, and hey, we can transform XML, right? So that's good. So I created a step which on the very outside looks like this. You put a zip file in, you put the course description in, and you process it so it dereferences all the references. Zip files are easy to handle inside XProc. And this link points to a YouTube film of an XMLPrague presentation I gave a few years ago about how to handle zip files in XProc. Let's take one look down, one step down. We have the PowerPoint, and what I first do with the PowerPoint is a process I call containerization. I'm not sure whether there's an official term for it, maybe it doesn't exist. What I actually do is I gather all the XML inside this zip file, any zip file, into an encompassing XML structure. And I'll show you what that looks like. So now I have one file where all the XML in the zip is in, still recognizable, still round-trippable. But you have now one file. Because all these files are interrelated, you can then much more easily handle it by XSLT transformations, which if you put in one file are much more easy to write than when you put in multiple files. So what I get back is an adapted container file, and I decontainerize it, and I get a zip file back with adapted PowerPoint. Now this whole containerization stuff looks like this. It was designed with round tripping in mind, so this is a simplified version. There's slightly more information in it. For all XML files are just wrapped into an element in a different namespace. And this is repeated, the XTLCon document element is repeated for every XML file in the zip file. And for everything that is not XML, I just create a reference, and the decontainerization process is intelligent enough to know that it should take, when it finds an external document element, it should take its input from the original zip file and just copy it to the output zip file. Also, these containerization and decontainerization steps are in the open source, in the container, on the link over there. And I actually, a few years ago on a demo jam in Prague, I actually demoed this by doing this with Excel, taking an Excel file, changing it, and putting it back and opening it again in Excel. So this technique, this trick, works actually for any Office file you want. So, did it work? Did it actually happen? Well, I had the privilege to provide quite a lot of trainings the last few months for a number of clients. And so being aware that this was coming, I quickly put all my courses into this newfangled XML tutorial course markup, and I processed it, and I said, this is a very good test case, let's see how it works. So what are the real world experiences? What are really the things I liked about it and the students? Well, the first thing is, the markup was easy to create. It wasn't difficult. Yeah, I created it myself, I know. I'm not really a very good test person, but I thought it was easy enough. Markdown for creating the text is in 99% of the time sufficient, so don't bother with any difficult markup languages. The training modules become very consistent and very, yeah, all file names are the same, all references are correct. So they're easy to interpret and use. If some students came to me and said, well, this is very good because we like that the files are all the same name. So they actually liked this whole idea. They actually enjoyed it. Once they got around and once they found out how the system worked, everything worked. Still, of course, small mistakes are easily made. You make a mistake in a solution or in an input file or whatever. It happens. But then, hey, I can just fix the mistake, press a button, and I have a consistent tutorial again. How nice is that? Let's wrap up. Yes, it helps. For me, it helps. But also the students think it's nice. And hey, single sourcing is probably always a good idea, isn't it? For me, XProc is almost the almost ideal mesh-up language. You know, you have components, stuff around that do some things, and you can just plug them together in different configurations. Of course, but that's with all things you want to reuse. design your steps carefully, design them with reuse in mind. But if you do that, you have a really good tool at your hand. XProc is also very suited for processing markup languages, especially because it also can do things like housekeeping and stuff like that, which means you don't have to sidestep to Ant or other scripting languages. And as always, because what I showed you here was a bit of an idealized version, this was the first implementation. I thought it wasn't really good enough, so I'm working on version 2. I have lots of ideas, it's work in progress, so that's why I didn't open source it yet, but I'm planning to somewhere in the coming month. So this is what I wanted to say about this tutorial development thing, how XML and XProc came to the rescue when I was creating my tutorials, and as I said before, it has a happy end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erik. So there is a question from Mike A.
It's a while, Erik, since I've done much training, but when I used to do it, my biggest problem was maintaining multiple versions of courses. The one-day XSLT course, the two-day XSLT course, with a lot of material common between them. Have you thought about how to apply this to versioning?
No, I haven't, but my trick is to create smaller modules. So I have an introductory course, I have an XPath introduction, I have an XLT advanced, and depending on how long the course is, I just pick my modules.
Hi, Erik, nice work, but I'm asking myself, was it really necessary to invent another domain-specific language? The online training, SCORM, whatever world exists for a number of years, and was this really necessary? And what are the reasons you chose to do so, or why? What was the missing part in potentially existing solutions? I'm not an expert in that field, but that struck me.
Was it necessary to invent another description language? Yeah, for me it was. One reason is that I'm stubborn and I like to do it. I admit it. The other thing that there are indeed, there are always missing parts in existing languages, and then you have to add them, and sometimes they're not extensible. But I must honestly say I didn't really look at them.
Okay, so thank you very much again.
Okay.